Just after 1 o'clock on a Wednesday, welcome to the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, along with Edgar Zazwata, ACSA Senior Director of Policy and Governmental Relations. I'm Naj Ali Khan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. Welcome. We are so happy to have you. Go ahead and jump on the chat. Say hello. Let us know what region you're from, what school district you're from, and what's happening in your area. Edgar, how are you today? Busy week already?
Busy week, but you know what I'm wondering, Naj, is I'm wondering how you celebrated, California reopening. Have you gone and flaunted your maskless face in any establishment? I tried to go into the store, and I gotta say it's weird now. You don't know what the rule is. I felt like I started going without a mask because I can, and I feel like I got dirty looks. So what did I do? I put on my face covering. So I don't know. We're gonna be doing that dance for a little while, right?
I'm with you on this. Actually, it is my wife and I are celebrating our 19th anniversary today, and we are going out to a nice dinner, and it will be one of them where I think we won't have to put our masks right on after we take a drink of water or take a bite of food. I think that's going to be the celebration of this, because I'm with you. It seems like there's a lot out there and people don't know, or people do know. And
hey, after how many, I've lost count and over the life of this show, I feel like I had the countdown. Well, we've been living this for 6 months, 7 months, 8 months. And, I got into third. I've lost track. I officially do not know what month we are in of COVID season, but it's been a while. So it's exciting stuff. I mean, I know it comes with some apprehension, and as we're going to talk about today, a lot of somewhat confusion about what this means, and obviously for us, what this means for schools. But yesterday did feel like there was some buzz to yesterday, right? The governor getting up at Universal Studios. Oh, did you win the vaccination lottery? I'm still waiting. I'm waiting for the email, but I haven't got notified. So
no, I haven't gotten it. But I'm as confident that I'm going to win that as the Publishers Clearinghouse people showing up at my front door in the stick. So I'm not overly confident that that's going to take place.
Now you're dating yourself. Now you're dating. Some people know what that means.
I know it. Ellen Wheeler was our very first one out there today on the chat. Ellen, so good to have you with us today. Jan Gonzalez is here. Scott Smith, so good to have you. Mark Campbell and Karen Kerr. So good to have you guys on the show. Want to let you know we're going to tackle a couple of issues today. The budget. We're going to talk about CDC, CDPH, and where that situation is. We're also going to talk about Cal OSHA, because there was a meeting last week and there's a meeting this week. And so we're going to have Laura Preston on to talk about that. Edgar, I want to hit budget, and I want to set this up for you to give us a bit of an update on what's going on there, because the constitutional deadline for a budget to go to the governor was the 15th, which was Tuesday, if I remember correctly. After it, Senator Jim Nielsen from Red Bluff quoted in the LA Times calling this a fake budget, calling it's a feel-good budget, let us get paid budget, but what we're voting on is not going to be the budget. That is Jim Nielsen, senator from Red Bluff. So, Edgar, an update. Where are we right now? Because there's a lot to unpack with what we were supposed to have on Tuesday and what we might have by the end of this week.
Yeah, and I think it's worthy to spend just even 30 seconds on a bit of a history lesson of how we even got to this whole June 15th date. There was an initiative, now it's years old. I forget the actual date of it. I think it's been a good 10 years. Those of you that have been following kind of state government, especially those of you who've been in leadership, know, because it left people hanging, that before we had a change in the Constitution, it was routine for the state to go past the June 15th and July deadline, that we would enter the new fiscal year without a budget. And I remember there was tickers but on the LA Times and the Capitol of how many days overdue is the budget. And I think we got into a record. I'm forgetting, but I think it was over 100 days of like that. The new fiscal year has started and we did not have a budget. So you can imagine the angst, folks trying to plan for the next year, trying to provide services. So with some constitutional changes, they made, this was passed by the voters of California, that the budget needed to be passed by June 15th of each year, that the legislature had a constitutional responsibility to pass the budget. by June 15th every year, or they would not get paid. So lo and behold, no big surprise. Guess what? It's happened since that. There's been no budget that hasn't been passed by June 15th. Now, here's the tricky part, and this is where Senator Nielsen is talking about this now. That's just a requirement for the legislature to do their job and pass a budget. And before, you needed 2/3 of the legislature, which that meant that Republicans and Democrats needed to come together to get that 2/3 vote. That also changed to the majority, to simple majority. But with that is this new requirement. So what happened earlier this week is the legislature essentially met their requirement. They passed the budget, but what we don't have is agreement yet with the governor, with Governor Newsom, with the administration on what the final package is going to be. So here's the angst that while, yes, the legislature passed something, there is still, and I don't want to say disagreement. It could be, they haven't formally announced a compromise. And knowing our luck, because sometimes this happens, we're going to be on the air, like 30 minutes later, we're going to hear that there's a budget agreement.
Right.
Based on what we were hearing earlier this week, the main point of contention had been about the revenue. Like, how much revenue do we have at our disposal? The legislature was taking the more optimistic look through the legislative analyst projections. The governor, there was some differences in terms of what the overall package is. Obviously, if there's more money, you can allocate those dollars more expensively, more of the priorities of the legislature. But that's kind of where we're at. The legislature did pass a budget. There's still not agreement. There's no trailer bill language we were talking about, which is the details on some of the stuff that we've been talking about. So we're hoping some of that gets resolved here soon. Our favorite word here on the show, soon, whatever that means.
Yes. Well, look, legislators and the governor, you have 22 minutes to knock this thing out and inform us that you have reached this budget agreement, because it is your responsibility to make sure breaking news hits during our show. Edgar, before we move on, let me ask you about trailer bills, because trailer bills can be really impactful to the way public education moves. Is there anything that we can expect to see, or is the devil in the details really connected to a lot of these trailer bills?
First, shout out to Sheldon, because as our viewers always do, and that's why I'm always careful and hedge, let me not say something correct, because they're going to fact check us. So
right.
I said about 10 years. So, okay. So I was pretty close, 2010. So thank you, Sheldon, for that. Time goes by fast. In terms of what to expect, I think overall the expectation is, I don't think we're going to have any huge surprises. It's a positive budget. As we talked about the last couple of weeks, they include, and on top of some of the measures to put more money into a lot of different programs from what the governor had proposed, the latest iteration from the legislature addressed some of the things that our folks were putting out there that were huge priorities. Money to STRS PERS to really try to buy down that employer contribution, trying to pay down the deferrals, which initially hadn't been proposed by the governor. Some dollars to pay down this unemployment insurance rate hikes that had been also put out there by the state. So there's good news. I don't think any of that's going to change. The one big one that we've been talking about for months is the finer details about how independent study and all the rules around that, how that's going to work, I think is obviously a big one that we're looking out for. And it puts our folks in a very difficult position. I mean, we're now in June. I know there's some schools that are literally starting in a matter of weeks, where the fall isn't the fall. The fall is actually the summer. And so for them not to have all of these details, obviously it makes it challenging.
Hey, let me, before we move on, let me shout out to a couple of our viewers. Lisa Salas Brown, who was one of our initial viewers, one of our very first viewers, dropping in to say hello with us. James Toth, you asked a question. We're going to have our two guests address that question. And let me hit this one. Dana Eaton, this may be the funniest message that I have seen in our chat watching on YouTube. Happy Wednesday from Brentwood, not Kardashian Brentwood. That is fantastic, Dana. So thank you so much for that. Edgar, let's go ahead and let's move on. Saret Kaminsky is from ACSA's Governmental Relations Department, one of our advocates. She is new to our ACSA team. New as in, like, I haven't met her in person, but Saret joins us to talk a little bit about CDC, CDPH, and any new developments on that. Surratt, so good to have you here on the show. Just so you know, your office is safe for the time being. But when you walk in here, be prepared that it's not going to look the same as when you first got here. Let me ask you, for a few weeks now, leading up to this reopening for California, we've been kind of teasing the headlines that guidance is going to be coming from the CDC and then from CDPH. We've reached that June 15th day where the economy was going to be reopened. So what has changed for schools up to this point?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, and happy anniversary to you, Naj.
Thank you.
In a nutshell, not much has changed. We've been teasing the guidance since our contacts at CDPH had said the feds were releasing the revised guidance in the coming few weeks. That's what they had been telling us. So it's been a month. We're still waiting on the CDC. What remains in effect from the CDC level is what we've been used to, that all schools should be implementing 5 key prevention strategies. First, universal and correct use of masks, that's required. Physical distancing, which is that 3 feet of distancing between students and cohorting as much as possible. Hand washing and respiratory etiquette, cleaning and maintaining healthy facilities. And 5th and finally, contact tracing in combination with isolation and quarantine. So in California, while the masking guidelines and capacity guidelines were relaxed yesterday, K-12 schools and childcare settings are some of the few settings that have those asterisks next to them. So as of today, all students and staff, no matter the vaccination status, are to remain wearing masks and practice the social mitigation strategies. Of course, we're going to hear from my colleague Laura Preston about the distancing pieces in play with Cal OSHA later on in the show. But the new CDC guidance and the subsequent CDPH guidance for schools is expected to address masking and physical distancing for vaccinated and unvaccinated students and staff. But as of today, the physical distancing of the 3 feet among students and the other school guidance pertaining to the past 2019-2020 school year is still in effect.
Thanks, Surratt. And I got to give Naj a hard time because he says he's never actually met you in person, but I don't know that's an applicable marker anymore in COVID. Yeah. There's some people, frankly, that I'll be okay to never see in person again. President company excluded.
Yeah, I like how he slipped that one in, Surratt. Like he and I have seen each other one time in the last year and a half. I like how he slipped that one in.
Nice. You mentioned the 5 mitigation strategies that have been thought about in terms of schools. And one of the things, it was our world. We were talking about surveillance testing and, the back and forth around that for months. It was like the hot topic. So as we look for, and I'm somewhat nervous to ask the question, but I think I have to think about this. What's the role now as we enter the next school year of surveillance testing, and kind of what's the latest of what's going to be the role of it and what's going to be the expectation for our schools in terms of COVID testing?
Oh, absolutely. That was such a hot topic months back. I mean, I remember going back and forth on the cadence, and it was all against to your county's tier color. But good news for our school leaders. Just last week, CDPH came out with some new testing guidance on this topic. And that guidance clarifies that COVID-19 surveillance testing does not need to be done in non-healthcare settings, so such as schools, and it's not recommended for fully vaccinated individuals. So, however, diagnostic testing, as they call it, should be considered for individuals with symptoms or exposure to COVID-19. So CDPH is still recommending that LEAs have some sort of testing structure in place, but there won't be any mandate that there needs to be testing of staff and students. One of the benefits that CDPH has expressed to ACSA is that one of the benefits of having the testing structure in place is to test for post-exposure testing, and that can be used to help keep classroom cohorts from quarantining. And I also want to note here that LEAs that are used to the pre-entry testing, so that was testing for athletes before high contact sports. This new testing guidance I mentioned that came out last week, it also clarifies that fully vaccinated individuals don't need to undergo that pre-entry testing.
Surratt, we had James Toth ask this question. I just want to make sure I get some clarification from you. We'll have Laura Preston address this as well. He asked, hello all. I'd like to see that school districts are not mandated to require face coverings for students and staff on campus. decisions should be left at the local level. Let me just ask your crystal ball, if you will, what you see as next steps, really, as far as James's his view on how things should be.
I think what we're seeing in California is that the masks will remain in place in certain settings, and schools are one of those settings that have that mandate in place. And one of the concerns, of course, is the variants. And obviously, youth 11 and under are not eligible to have a vaccine yet. So all the mitigation strategies that I outlined, those 5, those are all extremely important to maintain the health and safety of our students.
If I could slip one more question in here before we lose her. And I have to say, like, we've thrown a bunch at Surratt, so she's covering a bunch of stuff for us, monitoring all what's coming out of CDPH and vaccination. So we are very lucky to have Surratt on the team. Speaking of which, you've been kind of watching the vaccine conversation. Obviously, it was a big step to make children starting at 12 years old eligible. What are we hearing about now younger students, especially as so many of these rules seem to be applicable to those that are fully vaccinated? Obviously, youth under 11 years old are not eligible. So what's the latest on that front?
Yeah, well, like I just said, the variants continue to be a top concern. You've probably heard about this in the news. The Delta variant is more contagious and more dangerous than the other variants out there. So far, the current vaccines seem to combat this variant effectively. And also reported in the news is the increased numbers of youth catching COVID-19. And there's, again, no current vaccine for youth under 11. So again, it's important for them to maintain those mitigation strategies. I have heard reported in the news that there might be vaccine approval for youth younger than 11 as early as September, but that, of course, is contingent on the data and approval from the FDA. Regarding vaccines, I do want to mention something for our members, which is that the state is always looking to partner with schools since we're trusted in the community. Over the summer and as we head into fall, the state is really looking forward to trying to vaccinate as many youth and their families as much as possible. And there's 2 ways to partner with the state. LEAs can either host a pop-up vaccine site at schools, or they can even become a provider to receive the vaccine allocations directly. So if any school leaders are interested, they can email mobilevaccinesites@cdph.ca.gov for more information.
Surratt, we do have another question that's come in. Jen, we asked what recommendations might exist for secondary schools concerning physical distances, 3 feet as a social mitigation strategy in classrooms with class sizes that are normally 35 to 38. Anything you can tell us about secondary schools?
Yeah, Jen hit the nail on the head. I mean, we are all chomping at the bit to get answers to that. That's got to come from CDC and then the subsequent CDPH guidance, because those secondary students, they are eligible for the vaccines, and it should be safer for them to get a little closer. So again, what we have in place is what was in place for the 2019-2020 school year, which is still that 3 feet. But hopefully we can move into something that's a little different, a little closer, so we can get rid of some of that Zoom within a school kind of thing where we can get a little semblance of normalcy.
All right, folks, Surratt has agreed because Edgar told her that she has to. Surratt has agreed to stay in the background for us as we move on to our next guest. So if you still have questions, go ahead and drop those into the chat and she'll have the opportunity to respond to those. Surratt Kaminsky, ACSA Governmental Relations Advocate. Surratt, thank you so much. Let's go ahead and let's move on to our next guest, Laura Preston, also ACSA Governmental Relations Advocate here with us on the lunch break. Laura, we had you on the show last week to talk about OSHA. Now we've got you back on the show this week to talk about OSHA. What happened last week and where are we right now?
So that's a great question, Naj. And I can't let Surratt go by without me also saying happy anniversary to you and your wife.
Thank you.
So quite a bit has happened in the course of a week. Last week, as you recall, we were very concerned about the regulations and what was going to happen. Those were the ones that were passed a couple weeks ago, and this starts getting confusing. But the short answer is the guidance, or excuse me, the standards that OSHA had passed a week before were repealed. And then new standards were issued on Friday night that we've reviewed that will be adopted tomorrow at their regularly scheduled OSHA meeting. They did recognize a lot of the concerns that ACSA and some of the other education groups raised. So that's the good news, is that a lot of the overreach that we saw, and real inconsistency between what the CDC had done and it was stipulating and what OSHA had, opined, that were very, very confusing for employers, including school districts. Most of those have been rolled back. There's still a couple issues that are out there, though.
Hey, Laura, but first, a big thank you, and I think collective pat on the back for our members and for your work on this front. As it's evident that, there's been some movement, and I know there was a lot of folks out there pushing on that front. So just thank you. And thank you for coming back on. I think you're trying to compete with Tony Thurman about most of the
Yeah, but who wants to talk about OSHA? I mean, really.
Hey, you came back, so we appreciate that. Question that we got from Denise earlier about the 3-fitted distancing. I know this is something also that Surette has been looking at. Maybe you could just clarify, because I know it gets confusing. What distancing is in place, in terms of our schools? What's the difference now in terms of what happened June 15th? Try to make some sense to on all this for us.
To the best of that I can. So tomorrow, remember OSHA only deals with the employees and the employers, holding employers accountable for the safety and health of our employees. So that's part of what's been driving this confusion, is when the CDC is coming out with things about students and then OSHA about our employees. When we were talking about distancing at one point, I do think that the physical distancing is going to go away under the CDC. It's maybe too much hope, but I do believe that the physical distancing issues will be going away. But at one point, it was going to be that the students were going to be free to be close to each other, but the employees, because of OSHA, you're going to have to remain 6 feet apart from anybody else. So, how do you manage that? The real issues, what this is coming down to for employers to be aware of, and for all of you out there who are listening, is documenting who's vaccinated and who's not. And if you're vaccinated, you're pretty much, in the case of anywhere, you're able to not wear. Now, again, this is broader than schools. This is where it gets confusing. But under OSHA, it will be, you won't have to wear a mask, no physical distancing. You'll have to provide masks for your employees who are not vaccinated. But in the short term, because CDC ruled, we're still all masked in K-12. So these regulations are going to go through tomorrow. The governor has said that he is going to speed up the no masking for employees that work indoors throughout the state tomorrow as well. But we still, remember, in K-12, we still have the mask mandates and the distancing. We're still complying with the CDC rules from that. What they said is through this current school year. I've also been told that the CDC and CDPH are really trying to move as quickly as possible, because the rest of the regulations that are going to be adopted tomorrow by OSHA, because they have to go through the Office of Administrative Hearings, won't be effective until probably June 28th-ish. And so there are conversations going on to try to get the CDC and CDPH to get together and mirror more closely what OSHA is doing by the 28th of this month. Stay tuned. I mean, that's today's prognostication. It could be wrong in 15 minutes, but that's where we are right at this moment.
Hey, want to remind our folks, if you guys have any questions for Laura or our previous guest, Surette, go ahead and drop them in. Oh, Laura, Edgar asked me right at the top of the show about how I went and celebrated the opening of the economy here in California, June 15th. I kind of want to think about that in relation to OSHA and what could come tomorrow. Just from what you're hearing, what you're seeing out there, is there a lot of confusion right now with all of this? And over these next few weeks, there's going to be more confusion as we try and reach certain milestone dates?
I think the confusion is for our industry and for maybe couple others, but One of the things that OSHA has said in the new regs is that these are the minimums that we're going to have to comply with, but they still leave it up to every employer to be able to determine if you still want a mask or if you still want to have physical distancing. So yesterday I went to the bank, and the bank still required everybody to wear masks and physically distance, even though OSHA and the new rules, reopening don't require you to. So an employer, and that's why you're going to have to keep your mask in your person for a while, because every business can make their own determination if they still want you to wear a mask or not when you come into their business. So like a restaurant or anything else, you may or may not. So I've already been out a couple times, and I have to look at the doors or the windows, of every place I'm going in and say, do I need to put a mask on or not? So I think that's going to remain for a while. I think that, but it's left up to each individual business to make that determination. Schools, we just get, everybody else in the world wanting to interfere. And so we've got this additional thing. Now, the one thing I did not mention that is, again, unique to public employers is that we are hearing about some school districts. Some unions are demanding that the employees and the students continue to wear a mask for school reopening in the fall. So even if this is all, let's just wave a crystal ball and say masking and distancing are all done away with. And I'm not sure that that's actually going to happen, but let's just say it does for sake of conversation. Your local union still can come to you and say, hey, we want masking to continue next school year. And you're going to have to deal with that at the local level.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen some agreements that's part of what those are, what they've come, they've set some context for that. Right. So Laura, I know you and Saray have both been looking at this, thinking about it, seeing what's coming from the feds. I've been hearing from some of our members, especially in some communities, this whole notion, as somebody pointed out, how come Dodger Stadium could be 100% open and nobody's having to wear masks there, and and they're making the parallel, fair or not, to schools? What do we expect? And I know this is putting you on what do we think may be coming from CDC? I think our expectation early on, based on everything that was messaged, I don't think it was a huge surprise that they were continuing to require masks in schools. And this is aside from Cal OSHA, more in terms of the students and what they're going to require. Obviously, it feels like things have shifted a bit since then, given all the changes. So now, I'm interested to see what direction they think they're going. What's your best guess just on what we're hearing?
I think the dilemma for us is going to continue to be who's vaccinated and who's not, students and their employees. If you're vaccinated, there probably will be some more flexibilities. But if you're not, and this is where it gets really, really tricky for us, is that you have to maintain privacy for all your health issues, yet OSHA, and I don't know where the CDC will land, want you to document who's vaccinated and who's not, and then require those who are not vaccinated to continue to mask. Well, how do you do that and maintain privacy? And how do you, and how do you keep yourself, making sure everybody's being accurate? There is an assumption, and now this is OSHA for a moment, that if somebody doesn't want to answer the question, then you're to assume that they're unvaccinated. So for your vaccinated folks, I think it's going to be more fluid. But then because schools are unique, our business, our industry is education and kids. I could envision that some of the masking mandates maybe are relieved at the higher, maybe middle school, but certainly high schools, but still maintained for elementary school. That could be a possibility, at least until younger students can be vaccinated. So again, even with the rules that come out, and I keep saying this like a broken record, but even with the rules that are changing, and I do think, my guess is that the distancing is going to be relaxed at a minimum. I do think we're going to still have to figure out what our employees are comfortable doing. And there's a huge mandate on school districts or employers to ensure that you have masks available for those employees who are unvaccinated and want them, and in particular, N95 masks. And there's also the issue of documentation about who's vaccinated or not. And that, I think, is the biggest concern for an employer, because it's setting an employer up for potential liability issues if somebody doesn't want to tell you, or we're going to force them to wear a mask because we're saying that they're unvaccinated. And now you have two classes of employees. And I just can see for an employer a lot of issues. So one of the things that we have submitted in our letter to OSHA for tomorrow is to continue to work with them for clarification on some of these issues for employers and how we're going to navigate those issues. And for schools, we're going to have it's compounded because we're going to need to know some of these things for our students as well.
Laura, our board member, Daniel Hernandez, Region 3 over at Sac City Unified, asked the question, if schools or labor partners want to maintain masks, what happens if students cannot or will not wear masks? I definitely think that this is an important question, especially in some communities where there are a lot of people who are against the mask wearing, no matter what the age is out there. How do we address Daniel's question?
Yeah, so that is one of the biggest questions that are out there, and I don't have an answer. I mean, I think this is going to become a potential problem, and you can't force people to wear a mask. And if they tell you they're vaccinated and they don't prove it, or another question is, let's say they got vaccinated, but they lost their card. How are you going to, prove that they were vaccinated? And I think that'll get better over time too. But we're going to have employees refusing to wear a mask, and we're going to have students refusing to wear a mask. And so ultimately that will become a board policy. I'm going to guess that the board is going to have to figure out what to do with students who are non-compliant and the parents. And I know that this is happening throughout the whole state, that you have, parents and community members pushing back on all of this. And so it's putting you guys all in a really difficult position moving forward. And you're going to be stuck between your employees and the unions and then your families. And so it's untenable, frankly, for some communities. I know that there was a question about that came in from Barbara about NEMCO about, yes, if you are working in a cubicle and if one person is unvaccinated, that forces everybody in that cubicle to have to wear a mask. And that is going to create issues as well, because if you've gone out and gotten, you've been vaccinated and somebody in your workspace hasn't, and you're forced to have to wear a mask because of the person's choice not to be vaccinated, that could provide some employee to employee, confrontations potentially. And I don't want to over dramatize it. Hopefully most people this isn't going to be a huge issue, but to the extent that when those issues are out there, yeah, we can envision that becoming a potential problem.
Well, certainly these next 30 hours are going to be interesting to see what we get. Edgar, who knows? We might get the budget and changes to the OSHA guidance all at the very same time. Laura Preston, ACSA Governmental Relations Advocate. Laura, so good to have you back on the show. We're going to get to the point where we have to give you business cards just because you're a part of the show. You've been here so often.
Hopefully, Laura, I get to talk about something besides OSHA in the future.
Well, you know what? We'll bring you on to talk football right before the season starts. Go. That I know. Yes. All right. Laura, thanks so much for that. Edgar, as we move past the bottom of the hour here, I want to acknowledge really quickly. Give me just a moment here, folks, as I go back through. Amber Sanchez from Region 15, Azusa Unified School District, says, probably my last lunch break with you. I'm retiring July 30th. Great to have been an ACSA member. Amber, first, congratulations on an incredible career as a student advocate. And just because you're retired doesn't mean that you have to leave the lunch break. I mean, you're retired. So you've got 30 minutes to kill on Wednesdays at 1:00. Why not be here?
Yeah, I wasn't sure how to feel about the comment. I was like, okay, I guess maybe hopefully we can bring something of note and attention, even in retirement, that would keep Amber's interest. But no, in all seriousness, congratulations. And we know here as we enter the summer, whether it's folks moving on to another job, folks ending their first step in their career, moving to retirement, or just folks taking some time off. It's been quite a year. So our members definitely deserve it.
Well, and I hadn't even noticed this one, but it came 2 minutes later from Victor Thompson, longtime ACSA board member. I had no idea that he retired in January. So we're getting all kinds of retirement news in this one. Folks, just so you know, Edgar and I are not retiring. We have plenty of time left before before we do it. Edgar, hey, before we go, give me an idea what's going to be for the rest of this week as we head into next week. Some clarity for us as we move towards the weekend.
Budget. I'm assuming, just a guess, but I think by the time we're back here next week, I think there should be some clarity on the budget. What does this mean in terms of independent study? What are going to be the final rules? I would think, maybe I'm just being optimistic there. I think the big one too is the CDC. I have to imagine, and they know where we're in the calendar we're at, and that if there's going to be changes or considerations that folks need to make as we enter the new academic year, that's already overdue, frankly. So I think we're all waiting for that one. I think that's gonna be a big one, and I think just even the next steps in terms of California moving to this post June 15th period. I know that there's still questions about, if you go onto the COVID-19 website, they say all of that guidance for all of the other industries is no longer essentially valid, with a couple exceptions, the school one being one of them. But I know we've got some questions on, okay, what does this impact for sports? How do you do one thing or another? So I think that there's going to be more and more questions about, all right, where are we at now? What does post June 15th California really look like? And I think it'll take some days to really get a handle on that.
Yep, totally agree with you. Edgar, good to see you, man. We're literally days away from being able to do this down the hall from each other. So we'll have to.
Forward to it. I promise you weren't on my list of the people that I never see again. And happy anniversary to you and Carrie. Hopefully you guys have a nice dinner there tonight.
Thanks so much, Edgar. Good to see you. And thank you, folks, so much for being with us here on the Wednesday ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. Again, we are live and interactive for you next Wednesday, 1 p.m. here on ACSA Facebook and ACSA YouTube. Have a great rest of the week. We'll see you next week.